She didn't arrive like a sudden attack. She came like a whisper. And by the time people noticed, she was already living inside them. In the 19th century, tuberculosis was more than an illness. It was a constant, silent fear, spreading through homes, factories, narrow streets, and even the most carefully kept bedrooms. In many cities, the fog seemed heavier than usual, but it wasn't just the weather. It was the feeling that the air itself was hiding something. Families learned to live with the sound of repeated coughing passing through thin walls, like a clock that never stopped counting time. And the cruelest detail was this: tuberculosis didn't need to hurry. It had patience. What felt most unsettling was that no one could point to the exact moment it began. There was no visible wound, no clear event that explained the fall. One day, someone was still walking down the street, working, smiling. The next, they began to lose color in their face, strength in their hands, steadiness in their posture. The disease had many names, but they all carried the same weight. It was as if the 19th century had created an invisible enemy, so common it blended into the scenery. And in an era when everything seemed to be advancing, machines emerging, cities expanding, ideas shifting, one question remained unanswered. Why were so many people slowly disappearing, without warning? Then came the name that turned illness into a sentence: consumption. It wasn't a technical term, it was a raw description of what everyone saw happening with their own eyes. A person looked as if they were being consumed from the inside, as if the body was slowly fading away. Weight dropped, clothes hung loose, the face became thinner, bones began to show. But what frightened people most was the contrast. Many of the sick still tried to keep up their routines, as if willpower could stop the decline. Some insisted on working, on walking to church, on completing ordinary tasks, until the day their body made it clear it would no longer obey. In many places, that slow unraveling became a sorrowful ritual of everyday life. People learned to recognize the signs long before any diagnosis, because real diagnosis barely existed. When someone coughed for weeks and weeks, when fever appeared without reason, when night sweats soaked the pillow, a quiet thought formed in the minds of those watching. And perhaps the most disturbing part was this: to many, it didn't feel like a disease. It felt like destiny. As if the body were following an inevitable script, shrinking day after day, until only a shadow remained of what had once been a whole life. But there were moments when the horror stopped being subtle. A handkerchief stained with blood, for example, was a detail no one forgot. It was the kind of sight that changed an entire family's expression in seconds. The persistent cough, which began almost casually, grew deeper and harsher, as if the chest were fighting for each breath. Fever came and went, leaving the body weak, and exhaustion became a permanent weight, even without effort. At night, cold sweat made the person tremble in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening from afar to the city still alive. And in small, poorly lit rooms, the illness seemed to take up space. The window shut against the cold, the heavy air, the lack of circulation. Everything created the feeling that even the house was conspiring against the sick. A relative might try to protect them by piling on blankets, offering warm teas, keeping the room heated. Without knowing it, they often made things worse. And here is a detail rarely remembered. In many regions, spitting on the ground was an ordinary habit, and it turned stairways and streets into invisible paths of infection. The 19th century could not see the danger. It only felt its consequences. When cities began growing too fast, tuberculosis found the perfect stage. Narrow streets, constant smoke, crowded housing, entire families sharing a single room. The air wasn't light. It carried soot, coal stench, and dampness trapped inside old walls. In poor neighborhoods, tenements became sealed boxes filled with shared breathing. The disease spread without drama, like a presence woven into overcrowding. Children played near open drains. Adults labored for endless hours inside suffocating factories. And the idea of clean air felt like a distant luxury. There was a cruel irony in it. The modern world that promised progress also strengthened the problem. The Industrial Revolution filled the sky with smoke and pulled masses of people closer together. More workers, more production, more movement, more coughing. One surprising fact is that in some cities, tuberculosis became so common it was seen as almost normal urban life, not because it was mild, but because it was constant, and so fear blended into routine. People passed the sick on streetcars, in markets, in bread lines, unaware that one crowded, enclosed space could become the perfect stage for the disease to move. Even the wealthy were not completely safe. Mansions had larger rooms and better windows, but social visits, dances, and closed gatherings created opportunities too. What changed was how the disease was hidden. In high-status families, tuberculosis could become a secret, a silence, something disguised as weakness or nerves. Yet the body followed the same slow script. The entire city breathed the same air, and without realizing it, the 19th century was already living through a permanent epidemic, disguised as everyday life. And then came the doctors. And the most frightening part was realizing they were in the dark as well. Medicine in the 19th century had its advances, but when it came to tuberculosis, there were more theories than truths. Many believed in miasmas, as if foul air carried an invisible poison. Others saw it as hereditary weakness, something flowing through certain bloodlines. Some claimed strong emotions, deep sadness, or even a sensitive temperament could open the door to illness. That belief shaped an entire era. Tuberculosis was treated not only as infection, but as if it were part of a person's nature. The treatments reflected this desperate search for answers. Some recommended syrups, tonics, strange mixtures stored in dark bottles. Others pushed extreme dietary shifts, heavy meals meant to build strength, or harsh restrictions meant to purify. Bloodletting was still practiced, as if losing blood could drain the sickness itself. And one of the most unexpected details is that certain remedies contained substances that seem unthinkable today, because the logic was simple. Try anything that looked like it might act on the body. Tuberculosis, to many physicians, was like a shadow. They could sense it approaching, but they did not know where to strike. The same scene played out again and again in clinics and improvised bedrooms. A doctor entering with firm steps, opening an old book, listening to the patient's chest, and writing down symptoms that had become painfully familiar. The family watched in silence, waiting for a sentence of hope. But often what came was only a vague prescription: rest, food, calm, fresh air. It was as if medicine were negotiating with something that refused every agreement. And while the 19th century rushed toward the future, tuberculosis remained there, reminding everyone that not every kind of progress could save a life. Tuberculosis was not only a disease. For many, it felt like a prolonged punishment, a slow process that turned daily life into waiting. And when doctors had no clear answers, desperation made room for methods that now sound unbelievable. Instead of healing, many treatments seemed to test how much a fragile body could endure. Bloodletting continued, as if weakness itself were part of the cure, and some patients left more shattered than when they arrived. In other homes, the approach was the opposite, forcing food, pushing calories as if each bite could rebuild what consumption was stealing away. But the most repeated treatment was the one that sounded simplest and felt cruelest: isolation. Many were removed from daily life, as if their presence was too dangerous to remain inside the home. Fresh air became a promise, almost a faith. People were taken to freezing verandas, wrapped in blankets, forced to breathe sharp wind as if it were medicine. Life turned into an odd discipline: wake up, breathe, eat, rest, repeat. And here is a little-known detail. In some places, fresh air was valued so highly that patients were left outdoors even in winter because people believed the cold could kill whatever lived inside the lungs. It didn't always kill it. Many times, it only sped up the end. And that was how the sanatoriums rose, places advertised as hope, but lived by many as a kind of social disappearance. By the late 19th century, these institutions multiplied, especially in mountain regions where the air felt cleaner and the silence felt safer. From a distance, they looked like elegant refugees. Large buildings, wide windows, long corridors, open landscapes almost too beautiful for the pain they contained. For families, sending someone to a sanatorium was a final gamble. For the sick, it often felt like stepping through a doorway without knowing when they would return. Inside, life moved by another rhythm. There were strict hours to eat, to rest, to walk slowly, and above all, to remain still. Beds were placed outdoors in neat rows, as if the body had to be exposed to the sky in order to survive. And there was a specific kind of silence in those places, the silence of someone still alive but unsure for how long. One surprising fact is that some patients remained there for years, forming friendships, writing letters, watching the seasons change while their health swung between brief improvements and brutal relapses. There was hope, yes, but it was also a long waiting room while the world continued without them. And yet, tuberculosis did not stay hidden only in dark bedrooms or distant sanatoriums. It entered art, literature, and popular imagination, as if it had a strange role beyond death. Instead of being seen only as tragedy, it was often romanticized. The 19th century built an almost delicate image of the sick person: pale, thin, with a distant gaze, as if fragility were proof of rare sensitivity. In certain circles, the disease gained an almost poetic aura, as if suffering refined the spirit. And that is one of the most unsettling parts of this history. A real, brutal, contagious illness was reshaped into a symbol of melancholic beauty. Literature helped feed that illusion. Characters consumed by illness appeared as emotional, intense figures, almost sacred in their pain. Theater and novels created long, dramatic farewells, where coughing and weakness became part of a tragic aesthetic. But reality, far from those pages, was less graceful. It was the smell of medicine, damp sheets, blood on fabric, and exhaustion so deep it stole the right to stand. Still, the myth endured. And another detail rarely remembered is that romanticizing the disease also worked as psychological defense. Turning tuberculosis into something noble helped people cope with the fact that no one knew how to stop it from coming. Then, near the end of the 19th century, something shifted. For the first time, tuberculosis stopped being only an unavoidable mystery and gained a visible enemy. The discovery of its true cause, the bacterium hiding inside the body, broke through centuries of fog. It was not miasma. It was not sadness. It was not weakness of spirit. It was a real organism, alive, multiplying silently. And when that revelation arrived, it was as if the 19th century finally saw what it had been fighting all along. A moment that seemed simple, a gaze through a microscope, turned generations of fear into a new possibility of control. That discovery did not cure everything overnight, but it changed what the disease meant. If there was a cause, there could be a strategy. Tuberculosis began to be understood as transmissible, something that demanded collective awareness, hygiene, ventilation, and shifts in daily habits. Slowly, the language of guilt and destiny began to fade, replaced by prevention and science. And then, little by little, the fear that once felt eternal began to lose ground. Tuberculosis did not vanish at once, but it stopped being an automatic death sentence. The world began stepping into an era where knowledge mattered more than superstition, and where hope could be built with method. And perhaps that is the most powerful truth in this story. The 19th century teaches us that the greatest terror is not only the disease, it is not understanding what is happening. When tuberculosis was invisible, it felt almost unbeatable. When it gained a true name, a form, an explanation, it finally became something that could be faced. And that still echoes today, because many of humanity's turning points happen in the same way. The moment something that seemed inevitable becomes understandable. The past still breathes inside the present, and remembering that is a way of seeing how science, information, and everyday details can decide who lives and who is lost in silence. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us what other historical period or outbreak you want to see reconstructed next.